All right, here we go. Kinesiology 230. For the second half of Module 2, we're going to be jumping into chapters 12, 13, and 14. They can be pretty beefy when you look at them because there's a lot of exercise examples, etc. We're not really going to focus a lot of time on the actual exercises themselves and picking out the nuances of exercise. That's going to be more reserved for Kinesiology 214 and one of our other courses that we have in our curriculum. But we will be talking about some of the main points that are in each of the chapters, and these main points will be things that are reflected in exam and quizzes going forward. But what we'll do is use like our writing assignments to give you the opportunity to elaborate on a few of the points from the chapters. So without wasting any more time, let's go ahead and get going. So the main points that you have in the book here, it's on page 271, are the top 1, 2, 3, 4 from here. Describe the benefits, understand the factors, explain the value of warming up, and listen and explain the various types of flexibility training. Obviously, we're not going to be supervising a flexibility training program or supervise exercises using body weight or suspension training, but those are things that are right in the wheelhouse of somebody who does personal training. You're going to be working with clients on suspension training, TRX. You're going to be working with clients using medicine balls or just doing calisthenics, etc. So these are things that would be in your best interest to actually kind of wrap yourself around and get to know as you get deeper into content for the curriculum. Let me get myself away here. So the chapter overview itself, they list like 4 main topics within here. We're talking within this chapter itself: flexibility training, warm up, body weight specific to suspension, body weight training, suspension training, manual resistance, and stability balls, and recommendations for static and dynamic flexibility. So it's kind of a donut hole. Like right in here, they talk flexibility training. They have 2 other odd things that are in the middle of the chapter. Then they go back to recommendations for static and dynamic flexibility. Now the thing is, and I just want to point this out. This would be something that you'd see in one of like in 234, one of other classes I teach regarding the personal training practicum. When you start doing different exercises and use different exercise modality, body weight, suspension training, manual resistance, and stability balls, these are all things that are tools that are utilized within the training context and construct. Meaning, you can use a stability ball in place of a bench for a dumbbell bench press. So basically you're doing a dumbbell bench press on a physio ball. You can use the physio ball to do crunches on, but you can also lay on a bench and do crunches and sit-ups or core work in general. You can use a bench to help you with some flexibility techniques, but you can also use a stability ball for some flexibility techniques. So what I want you to do with this is, you understand the book is going to spend some time on body weight, suspension training, manual resistance, and stability balls. I want you to understand this as a practitioner, that those are all tools at your disposal to be able to basically introduce in different stimuli into the training workout itself or training program itself for your clients. And even though we're talking very much about flexibility, you start to play around with like a physio ball or start to play around with different small apparatus. You find different ways to have to use these tools to your benefit for flexibility training. So, sorry, when I go back to this, this is kind of that donut hole I was talking about. And these are the things we're going to focus on within this presentation. And I think 2 other ones specific to chapter 12, just the flexibility training, the warm up, and the recommendations for static and dynamic flexibility. But again, I want you to kind of wrap yourself around the context of number 3 here, where you can use these as different types of tools to basically introduce in different modalities to help you with stretching protocols. All right, so flexibility, if we look at like the main components of overall wellness, this wheel to the right, there's a couple different versions here. If we're talking about athletic performance, it's a little bit different. If we're talking about the elderly, it might be balance and stability, body composition, can be balance and coordination. So you see these 5 main domains, but you might see little nuances just based off the population you're working with. And if we look at what we're doing here in terms of overall wellness, like with this chapter, we're focusing on flexibility. And it's defined as, through the book, it's the range of motion about a joint or a series of joints, and it's the ability of a joint to freely move through a full normal range of motion. And there's a little bit of nuance in there, because what is full range of motion and what is the anticipated or expected range of motion for a particular joint. And it's a little bit different for everybody, So you kind of have to look at this and go, okay, flexibility for one person might not look the same for flexibility for somebody else if they're maybe hypermobile. Anyways, let's get back to this. One of the basic guidelines provided by the book is specific to the when and what type. And when you look at training for athletic performance and sport performance, like one of the big takeaways is you never do foam roller work before you're going to do explosive work, and you don't do flexibility work, static flexibility work, before you do explosive work. You can do dynamic flexibility, but you want to stay away from static flexibility as well as foam roller work and soft tissue work before a high intensity workout like plyometric training. But in general, you're going to start with a generalized warm up first. You're trying to warm the core body temperature up, and then you're going to work on dynamic flexibility, and it can be specific to your particular area. And then you do your workout session, and then you do static flexibility or perhaps foam roller work at the end. And the book does a pretty good job of elaborating on that here. When we talk about flexibility training for the people that we're working with in the general population, if you look at this gentleman down here to the right in terms of what we do all day, in terms of sitting at a desk, working on a computer, you can just think in terms of being kyphotic, right? You have pelvic tilt, heads forward, and then also you're internally rotated in the shoulders as you're typing on an itty bitty keyboard out in front of you, right? So you have a lot of things working against the person. And to that end, you also have a seated position where the knees are bent all day long, which is a shortening of the hamstrings all day long. So when you have a person come in, usually one of the first things you have to do is just get them out of this position. You need to get them on a physio ball, laying back, or even on a bench, and kind of opening up the chest, and you maybe do some sun salutations or something while you're standing with the person to be able to have them open up the chest and be able to really kind of get out of what is a lousy position to be in all day long. So with the benefits of flexibility training, you're talking about movement efficiency because you have the ability to have the joints move more freely through what would be considered a normal range of motion. And you have this reduction in the risk of musculoskeletal injury. And you're also working on trying to help prevent imbalances, right, within the body itself. Front side, back side, right side, left side, we have these. And I know I talked about a little bit before we talked about connective tissue earlier in the term. We also have fascia that runs through the body. So, we have this basically this flossing technique that we talk about in the industry to work on myofascial release and also fascia release and tendon release as well, because you'll have adhesions that'll start just through injury and then it ends up being this kind of catastrophic series of events that leads to an injury later on. And when we talk about like I pulled a muscle, when I say that, the first thing that comes to mind is like, oh my God, I have tight hamstrings or I pulled a hammy. You usually have that type of conversation with your clients where they'll say, I must have pulled a muscle. Maybe I slept on it funny. I was running around with my kid. I might have pulled a hamstring on my right side and I'm really favoring it so much. And those are acute type of situations, but many times those acute situations are a result of a chronic condition. And what's interesting, I've said it before, is many times a chronic condition is a result of an acute situation. So a person has a car accident, they have whiplash, it's 20 years later, they come to see you and they have like this kind of imbalance between one side of their shoulder girdle and the other side. And you start to talk with them and they start to talk about a car accident they had 20 years ago where they had whiplash. Well, that's an acute incident that caused a chronic condition. Now, what is interesting is when we talk with people who come in to see us, we also have people who have chronic behaviors and chronic conditions, much like this gentleman sitting here, who through their activities of daily living, acute pain and discomfort as a result. So, we have to have this consideration in terms of when we talk about what do they do all day long? Are they sitting at a desk? Are they loading boxes in a truck and are always loading them to the right-hand side versus the left-hand side? Those are the kind of things that will have an effect on the human form and the human organism. And then we start talking about what is short and what is long. If we look at this gentleman over here to the right who's seated, long on the back side, short on the front side, short in the hamstrings, you can kind of do the math and start to think of this in terms of where the person will be most likely to be tight and where they're going to have the most issues. And it's not an exact science, but you start to get in there with your clients and you get your hands on your clients and you get better at picking things out. So the questions become this, like I mentioned before, how long are they sitting there? What is short? What is long? And there's, some quick evaluation tells you in terms of shoulders are internally rotated, kyphotic. We have neck hyperextension. Notice the neck, you would think it's flexed, but it's actually hyperextended just smidge because he's looking at his keyboard out in front of him in this kyphotic position. Scapular adduction. In some regards, it's more scapular abduction than anything else. Yep, just like I said, scapular abduction. And then trunk flexion, pelvic tilt, right? You have that going on, plus flex or shortened rectus abdominis and flexed hamstrings or shortened hamstrings. So it becomes a conversation then. How do you resolve these things? Now, the book does comment on the importance of flexibility training and injury prevention. And they give a specific reference to flexibility issues as it relates to back pain. But I will tell you that given some of the chronic conditions that people walk in with, because of their ADLs, you're going to have more than just low back pain issues. So, the image to the right really gives you kind of perspective as to the number of muscles that can actually cross the pelvis here. And if you think about this, and this gentleman, as he's seated in his chair, in terms of what's short, adductor brevis, you have psoas major, psoas minor, iliacus, you have these muscles that are all shortened up front, and then you ask them to stand up, well, all those muscles attach to the spine, the low back, the lumbar area. And so those are shortened all day from seated, and you ask the person to stand up, and maybe you're asking them to do some like really heavy, explosive type of work. And these are so deconditioned and short that they really can't handle the loading. You're setting them up for failure. You're setting them up for a back pain or a low back incident. So you have to be cognizant of what a person does all day and how it can affect everything that goes on in here, everything that attaches from upstairs to downstairs and downstairs to upstairs. And if there's an imbalance, there's going to be a higher likelihood of injury. So you have to be aware of this as a trainer or a coach or a physical therapist who might be walking in and what that body is subject to all day long in their activities of daily living. All right, moving on to the next presentation.